Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? When we hear the phrase global debt, we naturally picture this dramatic, earth-shattering collapse. A single, terrifying moment where the entire financial system just stops working. But the reality of our current financial architecture is actually far more complex, and frankly, it's a whole lot more dangerous. Today, we're unpacking the true anatomy of a global debt detonation. And to be clear, we aren't looking at century-old economic theories here. We're looking at the hard data, the actual structures converging in this exact decade. We're going to explore why the real threat isn't just the staggering amount of money the world owes, but the exact hidden mechanisms of how that debt is maintained. So let's break down the numbers.
$348 trillion. Just let that sheer, almost incomprehensible number sink in for a second. According to the Institute of International Finance, global debt is set to hit a record $348 trillion at the end of 2025. To put that into perspective, that brings the global debt to GDP ratio to an astounding 308%. And public debt alone, just the money owed by governments around the world, stands at $106.7 trillion. Now, when we see a number like 348 trillion, human psychology kind of expects a massive, dramatic consequence, right? It feels like a balloon that's been inflated so far past its capacity that it absolutely has to pop violently at any second. But as you'll see, a financial system carrying 308% of global GDP in debt is actually not a system waiting for one giant collapse. Rather, it's a highly fragile structure waiting for a simple, operational mistake. The sheer size of this number isn't the detonator, it's the payload.
And that brings us to a really crucial distinction we need to make right out of the gate. We have to separate the Hollywood myth from the actual financial reality. The scary, cinematic version of this story suggests that a debt bomb goes off when a massive superpower like the United States or China suddenly defaults on its obligations, sending shockwaves that just instantly vaporize global markets in a single day of panic. But the reality? It's entirely different, and in many ways, it's a lot more insidious. Debt crises rarely begin when the total number looks largest on a spreadsheet. No, they begin when debt becomes harder to roll over, harder to finance, and way harder to politically absorb. The true danger is a chain reaction stemming from a refinancing mistake, a sudden, unexpected freeze in global access to capital. It's not some dramatic bankruptcy of a titan. It's a very mundane realization by the market that yesterday's promises can no longer be cheaply renewed.
The refinancing track.
Okay, so to understand the trap, we first have to understand the core concept of a debt rollover. Governments rarely just pay off their massive multi-billion-dollar bonds with a giant pile of cash they happen to have lying around. Instead, when old debt matures, they issue new debt to pay for it. This is what we call rolling over the debt. Think of it kind of like having a massive balance on a credit card that is entirely due today. You don't have the cash to pay it, so what do? You take out a brand new credit card to pay off the old one. And honestly, that works perfectly fine, as long as the interest rate on the new card is the same or lower than the old one. But what happens if the new credit card charges you double or even triple the interest? Your monthly payments suddenly skyrocket, even though you literally haven't bought anything new. The entire global debt system relies absolutely on the willingness of markets to keep refinancing these old promises at affordable rates. When that rate environment changes, the trap snaps shut.
And just look at the sheer scale of the rollover we are attempting right now. The IIF warns that emerging markets came into this period facing roughly $9 trillion in refinancing needs. Meanwhile, mature markets face a staggering refinancing wall of more than $20 trillion. We aren't just sitting comfortably on a static pile of debt. We are constantly trying to push this enormous multi-trillion-dollar boulder uphill every single year. Every single time a portion of that $29 trillion comes due, the borrowing government has to go to the open market and ask investors to buy new bonds. If even a fraction of that refinancing gets more expensive, or if investors suddenly decide, you know what, I don't really want to buy today, the entire pricing structure of global finance changes. A sovereign government that can't refinance cheaply is a government that suddenly has to start paying for every single old mistake all at once.
Which brings us to why this exact decade we're living in is so uniquely dangerous. We are facing a perfect storm of conditions that simply do not belong together. Think about it. Borrowing costs. Well, they're structurally higher now than during the easy money era of the 2010s. We've got those huge refinancing walls we just talked about, and on top of that, geopolitical instability is actively disrupting the bond market from the outside. For instance, Reuters reported that the war in Iran has wreaked havoc in markets, delivering lasting inflationary shocks and pushing sovereign bond yields to decade highs. Combine all of this with mediocre global economic growth and aging demographics around the world, and you've got a recipe for absolute disaster. Fiscal authorities are terrified right now that energy price shocks will bleed right into government spending and debt service. Debt crises historically ignite when rates, inflation, and political pressures all rise simultaneously. And that is exactly the storm that is forming right now.
So the absolutely crucial point here is captured perfectly in this quote. The The real risk is not too much debt, it is too much debt at the wrong time. According to the IMF's Fiscal Monitor, global public debt is actually projected to approach 100% of GDP by 2029, meaning the burden isn't stabilizing, it's still climbing, and it is climbing at the exact moment when it is getting brutally expensive to finance. When yields rise sharply across the globe, the debt bomb doesn't actually need an outright default to start detonating. It only needs a few governments to hit the market and discover that rolling over their debt has suddenly become completely unaffordable.
Part 2. The Sovereign Bank Nexus.
The global debt system is incredibly fragile because public government debt and private domestic banks are inextricably tied together. According to the IMF's Financial Stability Report, in weaker emerging markets, domestic banks were essentially pushed to absorb massive amounts of government debt right after the pandemic. In fact, bank holdings of sovereign debt in these weaker markets rose from 15% to 20% of their total banking system assets. Now, here is why that is terrifying. When a government is financially weak and foreign investors won't buy its bonds, it forces its own domestic banks to buy that state paper. It literally leans on the savings of its own citizens to fund the government. This is what's called the classic sovereign bank nexus. For everyday people, this means a government fiscal crisis instantly becomes a direct risk to your personal bank account. The state ends up weakening the banks just at the exact moment when it needs a strong domestic financial sector the most.
And this creates what economists very cheerfully call the doom loop. Let's walk through how this vicious cycle rapidly accelerates on the ground, because it's pretty wild. Step 1. Global interest rates rise, forcing governments to pay more just to service their existing debt. Step 2. Because they're paying way more on debt, their fiscal space shrinks, meaning there's far less money for infrastructure or economic stimulus. Step 3. With less government support, domestic economic growth naturally weakens. Step 4. Because the economy is shrinking but the pile of debt remains, the country's debt-to-GDP ratio mathematically worsens. And Step 5, seeing a worsening debt ratio and a slowing economy, global markets get spooked and demand even higher yields to lend to this country, which sends us right back to Step 1. And remember those domestic banks holding 20% of their assets in government bonds? Well, as the government's financial health rots, the value of those bonds drops, threatening to bankrupt the entire domestic banking system. The loop becomes a domestic financial disaster, completely wrapped inside a fiscal crisis.
And nothing grounds this theory in reality better than the real-world example we're seeing in Brazil. Reuters reported that Brazil's central bank issued a really stark warning. 50% of Brazil's sovereign debt is linked directly to their benchmark interest rate, which is known as the Selic rate. This is called a floating rate debt structure, and it effectively turns normal monetary policy into a self-defeating trap. Usually, if inflation is running hot, a central bank just raises interest rates to cool down the economy. But in Brazil's case, because half of their government debt is tied to that very rate, raising interest rates immediately increases the income paid out to bondholders. The government is essentially forced to print or borrow more money just to pay the higher interest it just mandated. It's literally like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. Brazil is a perfect example of how the specific structure of a country's debt can make a sovereign highly fragile long before any formal crisis is actually declared.
Part 3. The Three Sovereign Trigger.
Now here is what totally changes the narrative for me. As the source material states, the trigger is unlikely to be one giant country. It is more likely to be three mid-sized ones. This completely shifts our understanding of how this works. A global debt detonation is highly unlikely to originate from the United States or China simply collapsing overnight. Those entities just have too much gravity and structural support built in. Instead, the real danger, the actual spark, is a cluster of mid-sized sovereigns whose debts begin to reprice at the exact same time. It doesn't even need to be three identical countries. It just needs to be three important nations, in different regions of the world, hitting a refinancing wall within a short, synchronized window.
But you might be wondering, why mid-sized economies? Well, it's all about the psychology of global contagion. Mid-sized economies are basically the Goldilocks zone for a crisis. They're large enough that global investors hold significant amounts of their debt, meaning their failure actually really hurts institutional portfolios. However, they aren't quite large enough to dictate global pricing or force international bailouts on their own terms. Here is how the psychology plays out in real time. If one mid-sized sovereign cracks and can't roll over its debt, markets just write it off as an idiosyncratic event. A localized failure of bad policy. If a second one cracks shortly after, okay, investors start getting a little nervous. But if a third one cracks at the same time, that is when the market psychology absolutely snaps. Investors stop looking at individual countries and they start repricing the entire asset class of sovereign risk. They assume everyone is hiding the exact same problems, and suddenly the cost of borrowing skyrockets globally.
So imagine this synchronized stress event unfolding. Sovereign number one is facing a massive rollover wall, combined with floating rate debt, meaning they are instantly crushed by rising global interest rates. Meanwhile, sovereign number two gets hit by a sudden growth slowdown paired with an external currency or inflation shock, maybe driven by energy prices or regional war. And sovereign number three, well, their foreign financing dries up entirely, forcing them to rely heavily on their own domestic banks and draining the local economy of capital. This combination is incredibly explosive because it destroys three distinct layers of market confidence all at once: fiscal credibility, economic resilience, and market access. When investors see these three pillars crumbling in totally different parts of the world simultaneously, they stop seeing separate, isolated stories, and they realize they are looking at a systemic, global failure.
Part 4. Anatomy of a detonation.
Because remember, this is not a single lightning strike, it is a rapid, accelerating chain reaction. On day one, a sovereign goes to the market and misses expectations on its rollover demand and is forced to pay a brutally higher yield just to survive. By week one, there is blood in the water. Investors immediately demand higher premiums from any country that looks even remotely similar, and the target country's currency begins to weaken rapidly as foreign capital flees. By month one, unable to sell bonds abroad, the government aggressively turns inward, heavily pressuring its own domestic banks to buy its debt as inflation starts rising. The central bank is now trapped in a completely impossible choice: raise rates to defend the currency and crush growth, or keep rates low and let the currency completely collapse. By month three, the situation is totally untenable. An official lender, like the IMF, is forced into the story with emergency programs. A mid-sized local funding issue has officially exploded into a full-blown global crisis.
And this contagion spreads outward through four incredibly fast vectors. First, the bond markets. Rising yields rapidly reduce market access everywhere. If a sovereign in Latin America blows out, investors suddenly demand higher premiums from issuers in Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe. Second, bank balance sheets. A hit to government debt is immediately a hit to the domestic banking sector's solvency. Third, non-bank finance. Get this, cross-border flows to emerging markets are approaching a cumulative $4 trillion by 2025. When sentiment flips, that $4 trillion can run for the door with terrifying speed. And finally, public spending. Governments struggling with debt service are forced to slash domestic defense, pensions, and social spending. The financial crisis instantly becomes a volatile, real-world political crisis.
If you're sitting there thinking this is purely theoretical, just look at this number: $415 billion. According to the World Bank, low- and middle-income countries' external debt hit $8.9 trillion in 2024. But the truly shocking part? That $415 billion is just the interest these nations paid last year. Average rates paid to creditors have hit multi-decade highs. This means that many borrowers around the world are already spending significantly more money on servicing their debt than they are on national development, healthcare, or education. For these countries, the debt bomb is not some abstract theory for the future. It is a brutal budget reality they are navigating right now, today. The fuse is already lit, and they are feeling the burn of high rates colliding directly with high debt.
And that really brings us to the core thesis of this entire analysis. The global financial system is discovering that high debt can actually persist for a very, very long time, right up until the exact second it suddenly cannot. The supreme danger lies in the delayed recognition of the problem. A debt bomb does not require everyone in the world to panic simultaneously. It only requires enough institutional investors to wake up and decide they no longer want to hold government paper at yesterday's price. Once the market realizes that the cost of carrying, rolling, and defending debt is mathematically unstable, the repricing happens incredibly fast. There is no warning bell.
The global debt system is not waiting for a theatrical, movie-style bankruptcy of a global superpower. It is waiting for a sequence of mid-sized sovereigns to simply stop feeling rollable to the market. Once that sequence starts, we're going to see funding freezes, massive capital flight, banking stress, and frantic emergency interventions. We are living in a decade where historically high debt, structurally high interest rates, highly unstable geopolitics, and mediocre growth are all violently colliding. The numbers are absolutely enormous, but the trigger itself is incredibly mundane. A few governments will simply miss the market's patience window. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up today's explainer. As this massive global debt wall continues to roll forward, and as borrowing costs remain stubbornly high, when that global refinancing window finally slams shut, who will be the first to find out they're no longer rollable?